Buenas noches.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you on behalf of Arundhati Roy, and I want to thank Fundación Telefónica for welcoming us here for Alfaguara. Today is a true event, both publishing Mother Mary Comes to Me, as well as the visit of Arundhati Roy, this a publication of the latest novel of Arundhati Roy. Also goes back to our recovery of The God of Small Things, which actually marked contemporary literature. It got the Booker Prize. It received the Booker Prize, and it was translated in 1997. It was translated to many languages, and it got it compared to Garcia Marquez or Salman Rushdie. And to that amazing first book, we had the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Also received the Booker Prize, and Alfaguara will be publishing it again next year. And then we had many more publications until we get to this great memoir that was published a few weeks ago in India, in the UK, and in the United States, and it's amongst the bestsellers, and also received amazing critics. It was part of the front cover of the New York Book Review, and it's been very welcome here in Spain. Laura Ferrero, she's here with us today. I want to thank her for interviewing Arundhati Roy. She also published a review on the book, and it was one of the books of the week. Laura Ferrero is great to talk to Arundhati Roy. She is a writer, a journalist, and a scriptwriter. We have published Piscinas Vacías by her, La Gente No Existe, and the novels Los Astronautas, and also a book written with Payares. And without further ado, I'd like to leave you with Arundhati Roy and Laura to witness this dialogue that I'm sure is going to be full of passion. And at the end of the event, Arundhati Roy will be signing books. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you for your kind introduction. I want to thank the Telefónica Foundation. Thank you very much, Arundhati Roy, for being here with us today. The truth is that I am very excited to be here with you, in the occasion of the publishing of Mother Mary Comes to Me. So before I talk to Arundhati Roy and start with the interview, I'd like to start with a brief story. Back in 1997, The God of Small Things was published, and it is a book that I fell deeply in love with, and it's the story of a family from Kerala through 3 different generations. But not only did I fall in love with that story, and it's a book that has sold up to now, I believe, it's 8 million copies. So I was not the only one, but I especially fell in love with the dedication of The God of Small Things. And it said, "For Mary Roy, who raised me, taught me to apologize before interrupting her in public, and loved me enough to let me go." Then it jumped and it said, "To LKC, that just like me survived." And I have always thought that it's one of the most beautiful dedications I've ever read. And for years I tried to imagine Sorry, we had some technical issues. Can you hear us now? Yes. And I was wondering what was similar between the mother in that dedication and the mother of The God of Small Things. So I kept on going back to that dedication, and it's true that sometimes I thought about the other side when it said that like me survived, and I thought, why is survival involved here? But then I forgot about it to go back to this loving mother that had let her go. And you always read yourself in what you read, and you look for things that bring you back to your own life and your own dedication. So almost 3 decades later, in 2025, Arundhati Roy published Mother Mary Comes to Me, the memoir that arrives after the death of her mother, Mother Roy, when the intensity of grief overwhelmed her. And in the first pages of the first chapter, Roy writes, "I left my mother not because I didn't love her, but in order to be able to continue to love her. Staying would have made that impossible. Once I left, I didn't see or speak to her for years. She never looked for me. She never asked me why I left. there was no need for that. We both knew. We settled on a lie, a good one. I crafted it, and I quote, "She loved me enough to let me go." That's what I said at the front of my first novel, The God of Small Things. My brother jokes that it is the only piece of real fiction in the book. And Mother Comes to Me is the story of a mother that of a daughter that looks at her mother, and in that approach tries to find a sense in her life and her life with her. It is a memoir, although Roy invites us to read it as if it were a novel. And as she says, most of us are a living, breathing soup of memory and imagination, and we may not be the best arbiters of which is which. And so, in the face of the death of her mother, she starts word by word an approach to this woman who was a true force of nature, loved and made her afraid. And she faced the Supreme Court of India to recognize the rights of inheritance of daughters, and she founded a school based on creativity. And at the same time, she was able to throw plates against the wall, insult her children or humiliate them in public, and that mixture of love and violence turned their home in a battlefield. And that's why we have the Spanish edition title. Arundhati Roy says that she was my refuge and my storm, and she knows that those forces are sometimes inseparable. So throughout these pages, she tries to understand how a refuge can fit within the storm. And, well, in short, other people's words are a breach to our own. I understood 30 years later, because I feel that we always arrive late to things that matter, that dedication should always say what they say. Sometimes they mean something else, or they are in fact a wish. And now, after reading Mother Mary Comes to Me, the dedication of the God of Small Things is still, for me, beautiful, but I read it as it actually said something different to Mary Rowe, whom I loved enough to leave. And after rereading these dedications, I wanted to start this conversation by asking you when, how, and why this book, how it was born, because I believe you've been writing it all of your life.
Yeah, it's difficult now. I can hear my own voice. Okay, let me take this up. So I think it's hard to. I don't know whether I've been writing this book all my life, but I've certainly been writing in my head to try and explain my life to myself, because that was the only way I could understand. That was the only way I could handle things, you know. So when my mother separated from my father when I was not even 3, and eventually when she came to Kerala, which is a very she belonged to a very small community of Syrian Christians, and she was she was humiliated for marrying outside and then divorcing and then coming back, and that humiliation she would deal with by turning on her children quite often. But I could see the process of why this anger was coming towards us quite early, when I was quite small. So I think there was one part of me, I keep saying there's one part of me that was taking the hits, and there was one part of me taking notes. Taking notes. I was sort of I'm not talking about being a writer of books or a published writer, but the story of why this was happening is what made me a writer.
Dices en el libro que llevas preparándote para...
And, sorry, in the book you say that you have been preparing for your mother's death since you were 3. Your mother died at 89, and I feel that you weren't really expecting it, as if that was never going to happen. You weren't really expecting it.
Yeah, well, my mother was she had very severe asthma. And so she would have these attacks and she could not breathe. And she would tell me, I'm going to die, and what will you do, and you'll have to live on the street, or who's going to look after you? And so I used to be like, no, I'll breathe for you, and so I became, like in the book I say, I became her lungs, I became that person. And this fear that she was going to die lived with me all the time when I was very young. And then when I left and went away to Delhi to study architecture, because at that time when you're so small, you if a parent says that you think, oh my goodness, if she dies, I must die too. Like I must find some way of not being alive. But then when I went away to Delhi and started to study and architecture, and I realized that, it doesn't mean that I have to die. Like I can still manage. So there was this constant kind of fear for a long time. And it wasn't just a theoretical fear, because she used to keep going to hospital, she would be on a ventilator, she would, there were these great escapes. So in some ways you're constantly thinking she's going to die, and then because she constantly escapes, you think, oh, it's never going to happen, I'm going to go first. So it was a strange juxtaposition of things where you fear that death, and then you also are somehow insulated against it because you've rehearsed it so many times in real life as well as in my fiction. Like somehow in my books, the mother always dies, So it's a very strange sort of space where I think I kept thinking, if I rehearse it and if I think about it and if I look at it straight in the eye, when it actually happens, it won't be so bad, But actually, when it happened, it was bad, Obviously.
And something that caught my attention is that fear of death made you think, as you said, about survival. But also the fact that given that she had this terrible asthma, you couldn't really tell her anything because you always saw her as being too fragile. That idea of her being fragile maybe didn't let you tell her many of the things you would have loved to tell her.
Well, it wasn't actually that she was fragile, but she also... when she started the school, and we lived in this very small town in South India, very conservative town, where, a woman like her was initially not accepted. And then when she started the school, and it was a co-educational school, and it was a wonderful school, but there were constant battles with the town. And then there was me, who became, somebody completely outside of what they would expect a girl should be. So one of the ways she had of managing all this tension was to weaponize her asthma. It was always a drama, and then everybody had to run around, and so, and with me also it was like, you can't say anything because I'll just get asthma and die and go to hospital and die, and it'll be your fault. So in a way, I was never able to talk to her ever. So in a way, this book is my
conversation with her.
Yeah, it's not exactly my conversation with her, but it's my feeling that this person, this woman, really deserves to be in the pages of literature. A person that I could never make up my mind about from one minute to the next. And I wanted to see, as a writer, whether I had the skill to share that with the world. A person like her who was so extraordinary, so unpredictable, had so many aspects to her. She defied every kind of packaging, you know. So as you say, she's like an airport with no runway. You can't land your plane anywhere, you know.
Pero justo a mí me llama mucho la atención.
And it really, I mean, your mother, she really is a true force of nature, and she is a person that's very admired in the community. And suddenly, well, how can you blend that image in public with how she treated you and your brother? And I was wondering, how did you feel to blend both faces of your mother for that girl you were?
So I think I'm a complete adult now. You know, I'm not. Somehow, sometimes there are these people who continue to blame their parents for everything for their entire life. Yeah. You know, but so for me, I don't see it as a negative thing and a positive thing as such. You know, I don't fear the darkness of people. I just think it makes them more interesting. You know, and to me. Especially in India, you know, where there is this glorification or the deification of the mother that produces the son and then adores the son, and the son adores the mother, and the mother has to be in a particular way, and then it's okay, you can become the goddess, the mother goddess, you know. Or in the West, quite often the demon mother, you know, like she's responsible for everything, almost as a way of taking down feminism through the back door. And to me, I didn't think it, you know, these things mattered. I felt like what is so intriguing about her is all the sides of her, not one or the other. I was not writing a hagiography or like I'm not trying to present her or me as some great version of ourselves. But this is such an extraordinary thing. I mean, if you remember, there's a part in the book where I think I'm about 25, and I met her after 7 years of separation where we hadn't spoken or anything. And then she came to Delhi because she was fighting this case in the Supreme Court for the equal inheritance rights for Christian women in Kerala. And so I went with her to meet a woman who was like a senior member of the community, you know, and my mother was explaining to her why she's fighting this case. And this lady said, oh, but you know, Mrs. Roy, what will we do with these rights that you want us to have, and why are you doing this, and you're going to destroy our community? So in the book I wrote, I wanted to sweep all her cute mementos off her coffee table and say, listen, do you know who you just met? She's not just fighting for the right to inherit, to equal inheritance. She's also fighting for the right not to be a perfect mother, not to be an obedient woman, and most of all, not to be a fucking bore like you, you know? So, yeah. So to me, you know, there wasn't any, it's not like, oh, I was, to me, just this very, very fascinating person who happens to be my mother. And I wanted to see whether I, who happened to be her daughter, but also happened to be a writer, could write her, you know?
Hay una frase.
There's a phrase in which you say, as a child I love her irrationally, helplessly, fearfully, completely, as children do. As an adult, I tried to love her coolly, rationally, and from a safe distance. And I was wondering, is writing a safe distance?
I don't think so. I think writing is dangerous stuff, you know. So if for me, I'm not talking about for everybody, but for me, if writing isn't dangerous, it's not worth your while, you know.
Interesting.
And it always came to our mind that because you invite us in the first pages of this novel to read these memoirs if it were a novel. Do you think it is a novel?
Well, I always wondered why people think that non-fiction is facts and fiction is not facts, or non-fiction is real and fiction is not real. Because to me, sometimes fiction can encompass a kind of reality that non-fiction can't. And to me, the walls between them, they have ethical rules, but the rules that people think they have are not those rules, So to me, in some ways, I'd say that this is a novelist's memoir.
Okay.
So it's also about imagination and memory and the things that novels are about too, But I think if I were not a writer or a novelist, a fiction writer, a political writer, all kinds of things, it would be a different book, because a lot of it has to do with the skill and the craft and the business of writing itself. It's not just this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. But how do you write about it? How do you tell this, and how does the person who experiences that become the writer that she is? So sometimes, to me, these categorizations are important for publishers, for booksellers, which shelf do you put what, and so on. But in my mind, they are not so clear.
Ahora que hablabas de todo el proceso y de todo lo que nos
Now you were talking, yes? You were talking about experiences and everything that influences us when we write. And well, Maria isn't, well, I don't know, I didn't know. Arundhati Roy, she's an architect. She's been involved as an actress in some films, but she's also a scriptwriter. And I thought, how does all that training is blended in your writing, how it influenced the way in which you write?
I think, writers, they are in some ways the most ruthless people on earth. Sometimes they say writers, they eat their own young. So everything that you do and every experience, in a sense, is cannibalized. But to study architecture and to work in cinema, especially in screenplays, it really is very, very important for me in terms of how the discipline of the craft, that I'm not talking about the substance only, but the craft of writing itself, is very much informed by my study of architecture, my study of city planning, and then working in cinema, and everything to do with the book and the design of a book. I love, it's not just the writing, but the cover, the text, the layout, all of it. But I think there's a certain way in which I learned to see when I was studying architecture in Delhi, because before I completed the 5-year course, I had already decided that I wasn't going to be that architect who was, going to be building houses for rich people. I came from such a small place, grew up in a village, so I was very fascinated by how a city works and who is included, who is excluded, and that taught me a way of seeing which informs everything that I write about.
Ahora que decías que los
And you just said that you said ruthless, I believe. The writer has ruthless. Something came to my mind. It's Sheslami Loss said that when a writer is born within a family, that family ends. And I believe it's quite true. And
ended before I started writing.
Entonces ya está.
Well, then that's it. Well, there's a chapter in this book that's called "Did you ever think about being have you ever considered becoming a writer?" And I'd like to ask you, when did it first come to your mind to become a writer? Because there were several moments, but I remember I heard in a podcast that you were a child and you already wrote a story, Fishing with the Ancestors. I believe that was the name, right?
There was when my mother left, my father, was on the estates in the northeast of India, in Assam, and then she came down south, and then we grew up in Imanam, the village in the God of Small Things. So that village was on the banks of a river, and now I think of it as a great privilege that I spent so many hours on that river with a fishing rod that I had made, with a bamboo culm, and everything we made, we grew, we ate, we saw around us. There were no shops, there were no cinemas, there were no iPads or iPhones or anything. So many hours of silence, waiting for that fish to bite. And there was one old relative of mine who sometimes used to come to the river with me. She didn't like me and I didn't like her. I don't know why she would come. And then she used to make a lot of noise and talk a lot. And I always just thought that older people in your family were ancestors. I didn't think that they had to be dead. I thought that she was an ancestor already. So that was the story. But I also, before that, I think, before we came to Kerala, we lived in this little town called Ooty, and my first teacher was this Australian missionary called Miss Mitten, and we had this little classroom on the edge of a field, and for some reason she, it's there in this book, but a lot of stuff. But she used to tell me that she could see Satan in my eyes. Maybe she was right, I don't know. But so one of the first things I wrote, because my mother asked me what happened in school and can you write it down, and I said, I hate Miss Mitten, and whenever I see her, I see rags, and I think her knickers are torn,
Bueno, sabemos que se convirtió en...
Well, we know she became a writer. She published The God of Small Things, and well, she won the Booker Award, and that changed her life. And at some point you said, my river changed beyond recognition, and I had to learn to swim all over again. You talk about fame because it was sort of captivity as well, but socially, that's when your social commitment started, right? So how did writing that book change your life?
Well, when you read this book, you see that because I left home and for many years lived with really no money, or not exactly on the street, but every day thinking about money all the time. I used to think about money all the time. And then suddenly I wrote The God of Small Things, and there was so much money. And then I began to think about this, why should one person have so much money, And especially living in a country like India, where everything you see around you is so disturbing. So and I had a dream the night I won the Booker Prize, and I dreamt that I was a fish, and this green hand came into the water and pulled me out of the water and said, you can have anything you want. Like, what do you want? And I said, just put me back, put me back in the water. But as they say, you can't swim in the same river twice. And my river had changed. And because it was such a, big deal for people, the Booker, although to me it felt like a trap in some ways, because then they just want you to write the son of the God of Small Things and the God of Small Things 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And I, at that very moment, in 1997, just a few months later, this Hindu nationalist right-wing government came to power, and it did a series of nuclear tests. And those nuclear tests were not just about having nuclear weapons, but they were about declaring Hindu nationalism and a Hindu national state. And everybody, even writers and painters and people who I would have not expected to join this, ugly celebration, joined it. And the whole language that India spoke publicly changed. And I was at that time on the cover of every magazine as this, Indian person who had won this international prize. So I could see that if I didn't say something, I would also be considered to be part of that parade. So that's when I first wrote my first political essay called The End of Imagination. And immediately I was kicked off my pedestal and I was told to go to Pakistan, and I was insulted, and I felt quite comfortable and liberated. I was like, okay, somehow this is more natural to me than all the praise, So.
Bueno, relacionados con
Well, linked to your social commitment, you have all your work, all your essays. So John Berger wrote, your fiction and non-fiction take you around the world as if it were your two legs. So I was wondering, when you start writing The Mystery of Utmost Happiness, you already know, do you know that's a novel already, or do you know if it's going to be an essay? Have you decided that beforehand? So I was wondering if, as John Berger said, that your fiction and non-fiction just take you around the world up with the same importance. So when you write something, do you know already it's going to be an essay, or if it's going to be a novel? Do you know when you start what it's going to look like at the end?
Yes, I know. I know whether it's going to be a novel or whether it's going to be a piece of non-fiction, but I always have to search for the language in which that story is going to be told. Because by language I don't mean English or Hindi or anything like that. I mean everything you write, it has its own integrity and its own language, and to find that language and to find the structure of it, I don't always know what it's going to be, but at the same time, because I'm so interested in the structure of writing, not just the story, but how it's told, I never sort of start in the beginning and end at the end, So it's almost like designing a building or something, and so when it's done,
Quería volver un momento.
I wanted for a second to go back to John Berger. I wanted to go back to John Berger, and I know that he's someone you truly love, and I wanted to read this from you. I want you to promise me that you're going to go back home and you'll finish that book. That's the only thing you will do. Just finish writing that book. If something unsettles you, think that I'm right behind you as an old elephant flapping my ears to cool you down. And that phrase really got to my heart. That's what he told you when you were finishing The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And I was wondering, who was that old elephant when you were writing Mother Mary Comes to Me?
Well, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness is a book that is a conversation between graveyards. The graveyards in Kashmir, in the north, which is a paradise covered by graveyards in the war that has gone on for years there. And in Delhi, a graveyard where one of the main characters called Anjum lives, and she builds a guest house in which every grave is a guest house. I mean, every room has a grave in it. And so somehow in both these graveyards, the living and the dead, they mingle together like guests at a party. So, and even Mother Mary she's always walking around me somewhere, being quite destructive sometimes. But so I don't know whether, there's like John Burgess still there, flapping his ears for me. And I think as we get older, we walk among ghosts and we're quite comfortable with them. So it's all right. I don't have such a sharp line between the presence and the memory and the love of and the rage of those who aren't here and those who are here. It's like I move around with the characters in my book, the characters in my life, even when they're not with me.
Me ha sorprendido y me ha gustado mucho encontrar.
I was surprised because I found some symbols from the God of Small Things here. For example, that Papachi's cold moth landed on Rahel's heart when he was especially sad. Suddenly, this moth is here, and it actually lands in your heart.
Yeah. The thing is that in the graveyard, in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and in that guest house, there are all the characters of the God of Small Things. And then when I mean that part you read about John saying to me that you have to promise me that you're going to go back and finish this book, and I did promise him, and then I went back and immediately broke the promise because I got a letter pushed under my door asking me to go to the forests of central India where there's a guerrilla war unfolding, where indigenous people's lands being given over to mining companies. The same old story of handing over forests and hills and rivers to corporations. And so I was asked to go in by the guerrillas, and I went in and spent two and a half weeks there. And I talk about how all these characters came with me, and we were all walking around there together. So it's just something that there's no in my head. There's no separation. There's no such clear separation between characters and things that happen and moths that land on someone's heart and then move on to someone else's heart.
Yes, no separation. Bueno, de hecho, tú lo.
And in fact, you say fiction is that weird and foggy thing, and that writers don't truly own, although they believe they do. But you actually said that in the God of Small Things, you were talking about a situation that actually happens to the parents of the twins, and you thought that was fiction, and your mother told you, no, it's not. This was something real. How could you know?
So you're referring to a part quite early in this book where when the God of Small Things came out, my mother, who we had to call Mrs. Roy, Mrs. Roy checked herself into hospital, and she sorry, I'm looking this way and I'm not even paying attention to this. Anyway, she checked herself into hospital because she thought that the book would be some sort of an expose or something. She was very relieved that it wasn't. And so then she came out of hospital and she called me to her room, and she wanted to ask me about a particular part in the book. And that's the part where Esther and Rahel, they are 7-year-old twins who are pushed by their parents from one parent to the other, saying, you keep them, I don't want them. And so she asked me, how do you remember this? Because you were too young to remember. So I said, I don't remember it. It's just fiction. And she said, no, it's not. And I actually I still don't remember it, and I don't bear consciously the sorrow or the pain of something like that. So that's when I realized that, sometimes we don't even know what is fiction. What is memory, what is fiction, what is imagination. and we're not the best judges, which is why I said, read this book like you would a novel, because for me the guiding principle in this is really feeling and memory, which I don't write down, I don't keep diaries, I don't do anything, but there are things that I can't forget, and that's the way this book came to be.
Ya para ir terminando,
we're reaching the end, but there's one phrase. So we're reaching the end of the interview. Just a few more questions, although I would like to ask you 40 more. But there's one phrase at the start of the book that says, rather than a child that's grieving her mother, I grieve as a writer that lost her most fascinating theme.
Y bueno, te la uno ya con la última.
And I'd like to blend this with the last question. So because one question stems from the other. So if it's already, for writers, it's already hard to finish a book, how do you get out of a novel like this in which your mother is still alive? How did you close the book? Or what's the process like?
So it was closed before it began, in the sense that's what I say, that I don't write sequentially. I don't start at the beginning and end at the end. So somehow after she passed away, I found myself writing a long description of how she used to get bathed by these 4 helpers, and it's a long description of this ritual it's almost a feudal ritual, and it had all kinds of meanings. And then that particular description came almost at the end of the book, and the rest of the book came in between the first paragraph and this paragraph. So I don't know the logical or rational way to answer your question, except to say that I always know when it's closed, and I always, because I see the structure, I don't just write sequentially. So sometimes it's already ended at the beginning. Even in The God of Small Things, in a way, it's already ended at the beginning,
No, pero me refería más.
But I actually meant I meant the emotional side maybe a bit more. I mean, because it's hard to close or to finish a novel, because somehow while you're writing, your mother's with you. I mean, she's always with you, of course. But how do you get out of it?
Be there. There is no attempt to close anything. Okay. I don't understand this word closure that people keep using, because nothing closes, and I think it's fine. Why should it close, or why should you decide that, she was like this, or she was like that, or she thought this, or she thought that? I don't know, and she was somebody that you cannot close. Okay. You cannot close. So all I could do is to share her with you, so that you can also, experience it. But you can't close. She's not going to let that happen.
Me gusta que acabemos.
I like the fact that we can finish the conversation. I like to finish the conversation with this idea, the fact that she's endless, right? We cannot close her. So I now like to give you the floor to see if to open up for questions from the audience. We've got 10 minutes.
Everyone is shy. No?
Hi. My name is Cindy.
Hola, me llamo Cintia. Muchas.
With us, and I wanted to ask you about what lives in you from your mother.
So there are a lot of. I mean, I suppose in some ways the whole book is about that, But if you want me to give you some examples, I can. These are just fun examples. The real structural thing is the whole book, But when my mother was when my mother started the school in this little town, it was very frowned upon in those days for girls and boys to be in the same school. And she was very determined that girls and boys would be in the same school. But she had a different way of training them, the boys and girls. So when the girls started growing up and started wearing bras, and the boys started making fun of them, she held an assembly, and she sent the boys to her cupboard to get a bra, and then they came with this big bra, and she said, so this is a bra, this is what it's for. Your mothers and your sisters and your wives and everybody, your daughters will be wearing them, and if it excites you so much, you can keep mine. So she sort of changed that pH balance between the boys and girls. And many years later, I was, involved in this big movement against big dams in India. And I was and it was a Gandhian movement, very moral and very beautiful, actually. The activists were all mostly women who had sort of given up the pleasures of life in some ways to fight this battle. And I was at a press conference, and the journalists were all actually not real journalists. They were, they were part of this corporate lobby that was building the dam, that had come to shout at me and try and discredit me. And they said, oh, they were talking about my partner who had a little house on the edge of the forest. Oh, you have this palace in the forest, and it's whatever, some nonsense. So I said, okay, let's assume, once you finish shouting at me, I said, let's assume that I'm a really bad person, okay? I have a palace in the jungle, and it's stuffed with drugs, and I have bonded labor, and I'm not a virgin, but why should you build a dam? And then I thought, oh gosh, that's my mother speaking here,
¿Alguien más? Aquí. Aquí. Vale.
Thank you for being here. One of my favorite parts of the whole book is how much you've humanized her, and you echoed the same thing tonight. But I'm wondering, because you said you're an adult now, was there ever a time where the narrative was quite different and maybe she wasn't humanized? And if there was ever a time, is you are the evidence, at least to people who can relate to your story, that there is hope for forgiving. And yeah, I guess, was there ever a time?
So, there's a early on in the book, there's a part where I talk about, the fact that I left home in order to be able to continue to love her, because staying would have made it impossible. And then when I came back, I looked at her as a woman watching another, with, watching her genius and her rage and all these things together. And I said that, I've always thought of my own life as a footnote to the things that really matter, because you're living, in a country where you cannot insulate yourself against the suffering, the mad suffering of people around you. So I just couldn't, think of my own story as that important or anything. But then I said, maybe I pitched my tent where the wind blows strongest, hoping it would blow my heart clean out of my body. And maybe what I'm writing here is a betrayal of my younger self, because of course my younger self had to have been very very hurt to be able to leave home at 16 and then properly at 18 and live in a city where I had nobody and nothing. But that was never bitter hurt, That was even then I understood the battles that she was fighting. So there was no, I don't know, I find forgiveness slightly troublesome word because I don't know, it makes one person the sinner and the other the saint, whereas I don't think there was any of that going on. You know, this is just a reportage of people who are trying to live inside a certain context, and that context is complicated, and it complicates your personal relationships. You know, history isn't something that's outside. You know, society and history and the way it has been with people kicks down the doors and comes into the bedroom, you know. So I don't feel there was any forgiving or forgiveness or any of that required or needed. But I do feel that somebody asked me actually, and I thought it was a very interesting question about the book. He said that you know, have made a lot of place for ambiguity and imperfection in personal relationships, and you're not judgmental. And I said, well, you know, the problem is today that we tend to be so judgmental about things we ought to be ambiguous about, and so ambiguous about things we ought to be judgmental about, you know. So you can be judgmental about some little mistake that some person made or some little opinion that some person holds and condemn them forever, but you can be ambiguous about a genocide that's happening in Palestine, you know. So that is, I think, an inversion of the way I am.
Creo que tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta.
I believe we have time for one last question.
A delightful conversation. I wanted to ask you about a question that you wrote for the God of Small Things. The one about if you're happy in a dream, does that count? So I wanted to know your answer to that question nowadays, and if it has changed a lot throughout the years. Thank you.
It's a good question, and I think it does count, you know, because what would we be without our dreams, you know? What if we had no dreams? Like, what if we had only the reality around us to look forward to? So I think if you're happy in a dream, it does count, because even dreaming is a form of defiance against what we are being subjected to now, you know. And that's the only real that's the only real possibility of a revolution, no? How they used to say in the 60s, be realistic and ask for the impossible, but you have to first dream the impossible before you ask for it, right?
Pues con esta pregunta.
Well, with this wonderful question, you stole it from me. Thank you for asking that question. Well, this is the end of this event. Thank you very much, Arundhati Roy, for sharing your mother and everything you shared with us today. She's going to be here signing books. So thank you all very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.